These days, it goes without saying that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is one of the most popular movie franchises around. In fact, it's the highest-grossing franchise of all time. But that doesn't mean it's flawless. A number of mistakes have been made in the MCU, and they don't always get seen straight away. This video will take you through just a few of them. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It's the best way of keeping up to date with all of Screen Rant's great new videos. Tony Stark's brain hemorrhage. A major turning point in 2008's Iron Man, the first movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, came when Jeff Bridges' Obadiah Stane used a device on Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark that resulted in him being completely paralyzed for a short amount of time. But it also had the effect of causing Stark to bleed from his ears, which is a symptom that typically indicates a severely ruptured eardrum or, even more commonly, a brain hemorrhage. Either way, it's something Stark should definitely have been worried about and not something that would just disappear of its own accord. The problem was, however, in the next scene when Stark was crawling to his garage to retrieve the old arc reactor, the blood had completely disappeared. We find it hard to believe that he would take the time to clean himself up while he was desperately crawling across his house on the brink of death. So what exactly happened? It seems like a big detail to include only to forget about it in the next scene. But given most of the audience missed it too, it didn't really matter, until people like us pointed it out, that is.
You always wear such nice suits.
Touché.
Tony Stark's team. Marvel Studios would have us all believe that it had the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe planned out from 2008, when Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk came out in quick succession. It's even evidenced by the now traditional post-credits scene in those first two movies, both of which teased the coming together of the Avengers. The only problem, however, is that some of it didn't quite add up. In the post-credits scene for The Incredible Hulk, which was completely improvised by Robert Downey Jr. and William Hurt incidentally, Tony Stark showed up in a dive bar where General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross was drinking and smoking away his sorrows after Bruce Banner escaped his clutches at the movie's climax. Stark said to Ross, "What if I told you we were putting a team together?" To which Ross replied, "Who's we?" And that was a very good question in hindsight. As the audience, we knew Stark must have been talking about bringing together the Avengers. But in Iron Man 2, which took place concurrently with the Incredible Hulk in terms of the MCU timeline, S.H.I.E.L.D. wanted nothing to do with Stark because they saw him as something of a liability. So was Stark just freelance recruiting for the Avengers initiative when he approached Ross? Who knows? Bucky's 2 birthdays. The MCU is known for its impeccable attention to detail, but in this instance, the franchise was very sloppy, or at least one of America's greatest institutions was. In 2014's Captain America: The Winter Soldier, the Smithsonian Institution seemed to be proudly displaying 2 conflicting dates of birth for a certain Bucky Barnes, the movie's titular villain played by Sebastian Stan. When Steve Rogers visited an exhibition in the museum dedicated to his own life, it included some information on his old friend James Buchanan Barnes. It was certainly a touching memorial to the presumed dead soldier, but it had one glaring error. The text inscribed on a sheet of glass on the memorial said, "Born in 1916, Barnes grew up the oldest child of 4." But it concluded by listing the dates of his life as 1917 to 1944. The mistake was made in spite of the correct information being included in the same scene. You'd think that was impossible to do. Standards really must be slipping in the MCU for such an amateur error to have occurred. The only person alive who has 2 birthdays is the Queen of the United Kingdom, and even a non-brainwashed Bucky Barnes is far from being royalty.
Behold.
Time-traveling tapes. One of the many unique and charming things about the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise has been its late 1960s and early 1970s soundtrack. Those songs on those retro-looking cassette tapes are all Chris Pratt's Peter Quill has left to remember his late mother Meredith by. She had made both mixtapes for her son prior to becoming bedridden with brain cancer in 1988. Awesome Mix Volume 1 and 2 both left Earth with Quill when he was abducted from his home planet by Yondu that same year, but something about it doesn't make sense. They're both on Type 2 CDing to TDK cassette tapes, which didn't come out until 1993, 5 years after Quill departed the planet his alien buddies know as Terra. How did that happen? Did Peter's dad somehow bring future technology back with him to Earth to give Peter's mom the most high-tech, cutting-edge musical medium known to man at that time? What's more likely is that the movie's prop guy just didn't do enough research and simply chose the first tapes that looked suitably retro. It's a small detail, not one that most people even notice, and certainly not one that detracts from your experience, but when you find out about it, it's still kind of irritating.
I'm no family to Ronan or Thanos.
Gamora's home planet. In 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy movie, when Zoe Saldana's Gamora was talking about the Mad Titan Thanos, she said, "He's not my father. When Thanos took my homeworld, he killed my parents in front of me. He tortured me, turned me into a weapon." And although the line didn't make it into the movie, the trailers for Guardians of the Galaxy had John C. Reilly's Nova Corpsman Roman Day stating that Gamora was the last surviving member of her species, the SHRUNKEN. However, none of that lines up with what we learned about the character in Avengers Infinity War. In a flashback, we clearly saw that Thanos took her from her mother. There was no father in sight, then distracted her as his minions slaughtered precisely 50% of the SHRUNKEN, as is the Warlord's MO. If the rest of her people did end up extinct at a later date, that was either bad luck or extreme carelessness. But Thanos seemed convinced his plan was working wonders on the planets he had previously attacked, and that their populations were thriving, specifically telling Gamora that the children born on her planet since his massacre have known nothing but full bellies and clear skies. So that seems extremely unlikely. Basically, the history of Gamora's planet in the MCU is a continuity nightmare. Shrunken weight. In the first Ant-Man movie in 2015, it was specifically stated that when a human being shrinks using Pym Particles, they maintain their mass, therefore becoming more dense but weighing exactly the same as they do at normal size. That fact was illustrated early in Scott Lang's career as Ant-Man when he caused damage to things that he landed on whilst tiny in size, including ceramic floor tiles and a car roof. How then has he since been able to walk on a man's shoulders, run along the barrel of a gun while someone was holding it, and get fired into the air on one of Hawkeye's arrows with the same impact on said objects as an actual ant? It doesn't make any sense, and nobody seems to be complaining about it. It's a major error on the part of Marvel, and it extends to a number of inanimate objects as well. In the first Ant-Man movie, Hank Pym had a shrunken tank on a keychain, which by his own defined logic should still weigh several tons. Then, in Ant-Man and the Wasp, he was able to shrink his new building down to the size of a suitcase and pull it around. How? One thing's for sure. Once you realize how wrong the science is, you never take those scenes seriously again. Spider-Man's timeline. Aside from 2011's Captain America: The First Avenger, which was obviously set during the Second World War for the most part, back in the early days of the MCU, the franchise's movies seemed to be set in the year that they were released, which made for a conveniently straightforward timeline of events. However, as the franchise's plots have grown increasingly complicated and intertwined, some major timeline issues have emerged. The most blatant time-related issue in the franchise probably occurred in the opening scenes of 2017's Spider-Man: Homecoming, which claimed to be set 8 years before the main story. It showed Michael Keaton's Adrian Toomes helping with the cleanup in the aftermath of the Battle of New York in 2012's Avengers movie, which we had assumed was set in the year it was released. However, given the whole 8 years previously thing, either Homecoming was set in the year 2020 at the earliest, or Joss Whedon's team-up movie occurred earlier than we were led to believe. One of Avengers Infinity War's co-directors, Joe Russo, has since admitted that the time jump was a very incorrect 8 years. It really makes you wonder how Spider-Man: Homecoming's writers could have got this so wrong, and how on earth it managed to get through editing without anyone realizing. The Infinity Gauntlet's origin. One of the biggest questions we were left with after this year's brilliant Avengers Infinity War was when the Infinity Gauntlet was made, as the item certainly has a complicated, poorly defined history in the MCU. We first saw it in 2011's Thor movie, only for that one to be revealed as a fake by Hela in 2017's Thor Ragnarok. However, in between those two movies, we saw Thanos put it on in the mid-credits scene of 2015's Avengers: Age of Ultron, declaring to whoever was in his presence at the time that he would do it himself, meaning he'd collect the Infinity Stones himself after his underlings had failed to do so on his behalf. In Infinity War, however, we learned that Thanos had only recently forced the dwarves of Nidavellir to make the gauntlet for him, before killing every single one of them apart from their king, Atri. With that in mind, how did Thanos have it back in 2015? There's an argument that the dwarves could have made the gauntlet back then, but that would mean Atri had been wandering around alone for years without anyone noticing. Can the Asgardians really be that negligent? Or did Marvel forget about Age of Ultron's reveal that Thanos had already donned the gauntlet? We'll probably never know.
I'm sorry, Earth is closed today. You better pack it up and get out of here.
BOGEYS over Wakanda. There was a very obvious error in terms of continuity with Avengers Infinity War's post-credits scene earlier this year, and hardly anyone seemed to notice it. You remember the scene. It was the one in which Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury and Kobe Smulders' Maria Hill were driving through a city when Thanos' finger snap began to take effect. Cars were crashing, a helicopter smashed into a building, and people began to disappear before Fury and Hill's eyes. And then both of the former S.H.I.E.L.D. agents turned to dust themselves, but not before Fury managed to send an SOS to Carol Danvers, who is of course otherwise known as Captain Marvel. The problem is, their satellites had only just informed them that there were multiple bogeys over Wakanda, which means that the giant vessels holding Thanos' Outrider army had only just arrived on Earth. In real time, there was a huge battle, which would have spanned a couple of hours at least, between those vessels arriving and Thanos arriving and snapping his fingers. Unless the satellite Fury and Hill were using had a massive delay, and that's not how satellites work, the timing of the events in that post-credits scene were very, very wrong.
Doth mother know you weareth her drapes?
This is beyond you, Metal Man.
Thor eating shawarma. If you were to ask any random selection of MCU fans which was their favorite mid or post-credits scene in the franchise, you could absolutely guarantee that a large percentage of them would choose the shawarma scene from 2012's Avengers movie. It's truly iconic. And yet there's a glaring error in that scene that everyone just seems to blissfully overlook. At the end of the epic movie, Chris Hemsworth's Thor departed Earth with Loki in tow, using the power of the Tesseract to return to Asgard, where his mischievous adopted brother would be punished for his war crimes. So, given that he was in a different cosmic realm, how the heck was Thor present for the shawarma scene? It could be argued that it happened before Thor went back to Asgard, but that in itself would create a glaring error. When Tony Stark suggested shawarma, Thor said, "We're not finished yet." So for the Avengers to have just left Loki completely unattended while they headed for a post-battle snack seems very unlikely. The fact is, Thor shouldn't have been around when the Avengers went for shawarma, so that whole post-credits scene created a hugely puzzling and unnecessary continuity error in the MCU.
Looks like you're giving the orders now, Captain.
And that's the end of our video. Did you enjoy it? Which other MCU mistakes did you miss the first time around? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Screen Rant for more great videos like this one. Bye for now!